You're listening to Workforce Innovation News, powered by LWIA 23. Get ready to hear about all things workforce development and workforce innovation. And now, on to the episode.
All right. So part 2 of our conversation on what should WIOA mean or to local legislators, or what legislators should know about WIOA. Let's talk about some state level advocacy. So we've identified that infrastructure exists for workforce development and local control is paramount. What role do the state legislators play in securing state funding and creating policies that complement WIOA initiatives? We have federal funding. It's been the same for the last 20 years. We would like to have more, but federal sometimes seems a little hard for us to influence. So what can, at the state level, can we do for legislators to advocate for complementary funding?
Sure. Again, for state level legislators to understand that an infrastructure exists and local control matters. And if they can think about that when they're developing legislation, that would be good. Specifically, to keep in mind that the people that we're serving are usually low income, they lack basic skills, they have barriers to employment. So there's a couple different ways of looking at workforce development, maybe two primary ways. One is that there's something called a creative class, and that the creative class of scientists and engineers and artists and entrepreneurs that all have master's degrees are the way for a country to prosper. And that regional economies of swanky neighborhoods and universities and researchers and startups are what you want. So think like a San Francisco. And if you have a regional hub of the creative class, then you're doing real well. And with a creative class framework, everyone that doesn't have a master's degree and that isn't working in the creative class is seen as less than, or is seen as someone who, you know, if only they could figure out how to do what we do, then they'd be okay. So when you look at the service industry or look at manufacturing or look at the trades, all those are like bad jobs in the world of the creative class, because you don't get to take a 3-hour lunch break, and you don't get to go home at 2 o'clock after you worked a 4-hour day, and you aren't taking a 2-week vacation. And so you look at, and you're not getting paid six figures. And so you look at all those jobs as bad jobs and bad sectors and as a lower class. And so in your mind, the best way to help with workforce development is to get everyone a master's degree and help them become a scientist or a university faculty member or start a tech startup. That's one way of looking at workforce development. And what we know about that is it just doesn't work, and it's pretty classist. So Harvard put out a report in 2011 called Pathways to Prosperity, and it basically said, hey, for the past 10, 20 years, we've been talking about college for all. And, 20 to 30% of Americans have a college degree. The people that do have a college degree are in debt, and they don't all have great jobs. And a lot of people aren't going to college. Are there opportunities outside of 100 grand in debt and in a university degree? And you start looking at, yeah, there are. You can start a business that's not a tech startup and doesn't require a master's in engineering or an MBA. You can go to a community college. You can just go into an industry and work your way up and have on-the-job training. You can go get a certificate. And so that's kind of a worldview for looking at workforce development, where you use multiple pathways approach, and then you think about all clusters have opportunities in them. So it's not just a creative class cluster, but it's manufacturing, it's business services, it's healthcare, it's the Association for Career and Tech Ed. All 16 of those career clusters matter. And so workforce development, you kind of zoom out and you go, all these career clusters matter, not just the creative class. All clusters have a pathway to prosperity, and there's multiple pathways, not just through a master's, but through just getting a job or starting a business or getting a certificate or getting associates, and maybe someday, if you want, getting a bachelor if that's needed or required. And so when you think about workforce development in that way, you think differently. So a lot of times what will happen is a legislator will come to us in workforce development and say, how can we get more people to go to a university? And so you know already that they're not thinking about workforce development in the quote unquote right way. They're thinking about it in an outdated way that's 20 plus years old that has been proven not to work. And so, however, if you want to have that conversation in a practical way, that's one of it's challenging, but to get because people are really excited about universities and they're really excited about bachelor and master's degrees, and they're not so excited about an HVAC. Although I will say that's changed in the past 5 years. Like in the past 5 years, people are kind of sort of starting to get it. So, and then historically, the people who were just your traditional students who were going to a university, they didn't have any barriers to employment. They weren't low income. They weren't struggling. And so if you only think about the creative class, which is people who have affluence, who have access, um, who can take 6 years to not do anything besides go to school, you're eliminating the realities and lived experience of 50 to 70% of America's population, which are folks who in the next 6 months to 2 years need to turn their life around so they can find gainful employment with family sustaining wages. Um, and that those folks that are doing that, they need supportive services and they need some extra help and they need some extra support. So helping legislators understand that there's multiple pathways to prosperity. It's not just the creative class, and that the people that we're helping are folks that are in need. All those things are um, important to frame the conversation with a legislator, because otherwise they're talking a different language. They're living in a different world than the world that we live in.
Absolutely. And I mean, coming from a background where I definitely see the value of, I guess, what's traditionally been called the working class. I know it comes up in conversation in my household, just even when things happen in life. Oh, the air conditioning isn't working. We have to call an HVAC company because we don't have the skills or the know-how to fix it ourselves. And now let's have a conversation with the HVAC tech because he's there, he's in our house, and then we're learning about him and the path he went through to get to his career. So what I'm hearing or what I'm feeling is that I just need to go to these legislators' homes and take out a capacitor in their AC, and then maybe they'll have that opportunity to have that discussion of we do need more than just that creative class. That yes, things have been changing the last 5 years, and we're realizing there's more pathways, but it's not until we experience that or we've met someone with that firsthand experience that legislators that's what's changing the mindset is when
Mhm.
we can look, see, feel, taste the change.
Right.
Um, so we just need to get legislators to be more aware and involved.
Yeah, and the
So
tough thing about that is um, a university can have a banquet for a governor,
absolutely.
and I'm running a local workforce system. So I'm not having parties. I'm not having press releases with photo ops. I'm helping people who are poor go back to school, and it's not sexy. It's not fancy. It's the the gritty work of helping people transform their lives. And so, finding people who care enough to take the time to listen that are in state politics, and to realize that just because it's not as um, on a big stage doesn't mean it's not important. And
Absolutely.
that would be anyone in power in general.
Yeah,
Like, pay attention to the things that are happening that are practical and that are um, meeting a need, and not just, the splash.
not the next photo shoot.
Right.
Photo shoot. Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about actions that federal legislators can take to prioritize funding for workforce development in the national budget. What would you have to say about that, or what can we do to help our national legislators know?
Sure. Maybe not speaking directly to that, but speaking in general, over the past 5 years, excuse me, 4 years since COVID, everyone noticed that workforce development was an issue. And now every federal department thinks that they're in workforce development. So the Department of Energy, the Department of Commerce, the Economic Development Administration, everyone has decided that they're going to step in and they're going to fix the thing that's causing the nation's woes. And what happens with all of these departments is that they just completely duplicate the infrastructure that already exists. Um, and they make a new bill and a new program that they feel is innovative, but it happened like 60 years ago, and it's part of who we are already as a system. So, for example, right now, the EDA has a good jobs NOFO out that says, hey, if you're going to do sector partnerships and work on good jobs, apply to this. And it's open to nonprofits and community colleges and et cetera, so on and so forth. The problem if a nonprofit or community college gets these grants is they work apart from the workforce system usually. So a nonprofit will work in their own nonprofit, a community college will work on their campus, and they reinvent the things that already exist in the workforce system, career services, individualized training, supportive services, without the oversight of the local board. Um, and so that's a challenge for us because we're underfunded. We're supposed to be doing sector partnerships. We're supposed to be promoting good jobs. And instead of funding us so that we can do those things, they say, do those things, but we're going to give this money. We're going to create this new program to some group that's not associated with you. They're not going to come to workforce board meetings. They're not going to work in one steps. They're not going to know who all the partners are. They're not going to work with the groups that you work. They're not going to work within the policies or structure that's in place. They're just going to kind of do their own thing. And so what happens is, especially with nonprofits, it takes them a year to figure out what workforce development is. And then it takes them another year to hire staff, and they have a bunch of turnover to try and do the job. And then by the third year, they go, this is too complex. And they just go, we're not going to finish out this grant. So the federal government's really setting up the nation for failure, even though they think that they're solving an issue. Everything should be pointed towards states and workforce boards. There shouldn't be, when it comes to workforce development, there shouldn't be a new program through 20 different departments. Um, I don't have any control over that, but it's just the reality of what are you doing? So in the past 6 months, I've gone to DC a couple times and I've seen a couple different speakers from different departments talk. And the way that they talk about workforce development is a need. There's nothing going on. Our department's going to create this new thing to solve it. And it's so disconnected from the national system and local infrastructure. And it lacks complete awareness that it's just kind of, for me, sad. Like, come on, what are you doing? So it's trying to get federal legislators to realize you don't have to do something new. And if you do want to do something new or unique, tie it to the system that already exists. But the issue that I've found as I'm watching all this happen is on a local level, you can talk about the board and talk about the people that you're helping. And when you start to get to a regional, state, and national level, you start meeting lobbyists
Mhm.
and people that are delegated by institutions and entities to manufacture conflict and spread PR in a way that makes them look good. So the problem that we're facing as a state and as a nation is you have folks that are kind of spreading misinformation about the workforce development system in order to make themselves look good and say, yeah, you should make a new program, you should make a new department, and you should give it the money to us.
Right.
and those are that's in education, and then that's in nonprofits, and it's um, it's really unfortunate. And this is new to me, so I'm not 100% sure how to deal with that. Because in my world, I reasonably will explain something and try and negotiate. In that world, it's we want this thing, get out of our way. We're going to try and get it. And it's such a strange world to me, but it exists.
It does. And that was going to be my next point is even though we're bipartisan legislation, like politics really still does come into play with it. And
It does.
it is weird. Like when you come from this world of what's rational and what makes sense and what's logical to
Hmm.
it's emotionally charged and
Yes.
there's misinformation confidently being spread. It's not even
Right.
it's mistaken, it's intentional
Right.
and it's confident and
Right.
it is like what I'm not cut out for that. Like
Right.
that is why I'm in workforce development and not politics. That's
Right.
what I thought.
Yes. Yeah.
So the local workforce boards are appointed by chief elected officials. And in WIOA speak, what that means is it's the chairs of each of the county boards of that local workforce innovation area. So
Hmm.
those are the elected officials we have most influence over. What can we do as directors, as participants in the local workforce? What can we do to get our chief elected officials at the county level to advocate for us beyond our workforce area? How can we
Yeah.
leverage them?
That's a good question. Because when it comes to all levels of government, they should be our strongest advocates.
Mhm.
And I went to a information session earlier this year about WIO reauthorization, and it involved the National Association of Counties, NACO, and they're based in DC. But he said something that I thought was really awesome, which was, as county governments, we don't look at us as doing something for the federal government or doing something for states. We look at ourselves as co-equal partners in workforce development, that all three of us are on the same level and we each have our part. And it's
Mm,
county governments, it's the state government, it's the federal government, and we each have a part to play. And that is a federalist way of looking at the world, which is it's not the Fed running the country, it's the Fed working with states, working with counties that allow people to self-govern. So those principles of federalism are really important in practice. That county governments are a co-equal partner with the federal government and with state governments on the national workforce development system. And so when you have different stakeholders and different entities and different lobbyists and advocacy groups, quote unquote, going after the workforce system, really having county governments understand the workforce system that currently exists is your workforce system.
right.
It's part of county government, just like the roads, just like the waterways, just like windmill laws. The workforce development is part of county government, and we need you to protect and advocate for it. And so they should be our strongest allies. And so in some states, there's a really intentional relationship between the State Workforce Association of board directors, excuse me, and county governments. So
Mhm.
I think it's in Minnesota. They share the State Association of Workforce Boards and the State Association of County Governments shares the cost of a state level workforce development director, because the counties are so bought into, oh, the workforce system is a part of county government. We need to be really involved. I'd
Yeah,
like to see that happen in Illinois.
absolutely.
Hmm.
I think that's what we're missing, yes, because
Yes,
it is so local control is great, but
right,
when it's too compartmentalized, we can't like there's strength in numbers. We have to have
right.
one solid voice. So I think that's a great idea, and I hope that that's something that comes to Illinois in the next few years. I think that's going to make a world of difference.
Yes, I think so too.
All right, Justin, this has been super informative. As someone who's I would like to call myself well-versed in workforce. I feel like I've learned new things and I've had new aha moments. But I think that's going to wrap us up for today. Before we sign off, though, I got a few more rapid fire questions
All
for
right,
you. All right.
the fun stuff.
So let's see. When you were in high school, what was your worst subject?
Math.
Why math?
I had from I always kind of struggled with math, like through elementary school. At the end of the year, I would kind of start to get it, and by the next year, I would have it. But throughout the year, I would struggle. So if it was third grade learning long division, I don't remember. I would struggle a year. The last like month, I'd be like, okay, this is what it is, and the next year, I'd be able to do it. And then after fifth grade, I skipped sixth grade and I went to the seventh grade. And going into like an algebra
Mhm.
class, I just fell completely behind right away. And then I didn't
Wow.
have a really strong home situation. So there wasn't any support to kind of figure out, how to get back into it. And I just never was able to kind of reconnect to math. Yeah. Which as an
Okay.
adult, I wish I could figure out how to like fix that.
See, as I got older, I got more and more into math, but it's
Yeah.
still hard. It's still not my favorite, but
Yeah.
I see math in everything now. So that's why when people, especially very intelligent people that I respect, when I hear you guys say that you don't like math, like it's everywhere though. But
I
yes,
like math. It's just a struggle for me. I feel like I'm always behind and don't quite have the skills that I'd like to have. I can figure it out. I'm not, I had to take a couple statistics course throughout my life and I like went through it, but I think it should be easier and it's not. I'm missing something.
that's just because everything else has come easier to you than math. That's
I
all.
think so.
What advice would you give to your young self?
Um, the cliche, like it'll be okay, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So
You think your young self would listen to that?
to me, my young self would listen to me if I came from the future. Listen, it's gonna be all right. You're gonna figure it out. Yeah.
Awesome. Chocolate or vanilla?
Oh my goodness. Chocolate.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunrise.
You are a morning person. All right.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Justin. I appreciate your time so much. We're recording this on a Monday morning at that, so it means even more to me that you're willing to take that time and jump right into this big old conversation first thing to kick off the week. But you are more productive in the mornings. That makes sense now.
Yeah. Thanks
All right. Any
so much for
parting
having me.
thoughts or anything you want to tell our listeners while we still have them?
Um, no, I just appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about this topic. It means a lot to me and hopefully somebody got something out of it. So thank you.
I'm sure they will.
Good.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
You've been listening to Workforce Innovation News powered by LWIA 23. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. To learn more about LWIA 23, visit lwa23.net.